Hello, this is BBC World News. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. Our top stories: Belarus's authoritarian leader Alexander Lukashenko speaks exclusively to the BBC. In a defiant interview, he admits that his forces may have helped migrants cross into the European Union and that he won't stop people from reaching the border.
I told the EU I'm not going to detain migrants on the border, hold them at the border, and if they keep coming from now on, I still won't stop them.
As coronavirus infections surge across Europe, Austria is making COVID vaccinations compulsory and is reintroducing a full national lockdown. Kamala Harris has become the first woman ever to serve as acting president of the United States, having taken over briefly while Joe Biden had a medical procedure. Indian farmers celebrate after a surprise U-turn by Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Today, I have come to tell you, the whole country, that we have decided to withdraw and repeal all 3 agricultural laws.
Hello and welcome to the programme. Belarus's long-time authoritarian leader Alexander Lukashenko has told the BBC it's possible that his border guards might be helping migrants reach Poland. Now, thousands of migrants, mainly from the Middle East, have been trying to cross into the European Union at the frontier between Poland and Belarus in recent weeks. And the EU accuses Mr. Lukashenko of masterminding this in revenge for sanctions. In an exclusive sit-down interview with our Russia correspondent Steve Rosenberg, Mr. Lukashenko said he has no intention to stop people reaching the EU.
Our guys are helping the migrants get into the Polish territory. It's perfectly possible. I think that's absolutely possible. Maybe someone helped them. I won't even look into this.
You told the EU that Belarus had been stopping migrants, but now they must catch them themselves. The migrants told us they took that to mean Belarus is open to them.
I told the EU I'm not going to detain migrants on the border, hold them at the border, and if they keep coming from now on, I still won't stop them. Because they're not coming to my country, they're going to yours. The West stopped talking to us and working with us. If you don't want to, then fine. We'll sort this problem out ourselves, as best we can.
We saw protesters being beaten, and we saw young people coming out of detention centres with injuries on their bodies.
Okay, I admit it.
You admit it?
People were beaten at the Akrestina detention centre, but there were police beaten up too, and you didn't show this.
Since July, 270 NGOs have been shut down in Belarus.
I'll answer your question with no bother. We'll massacre all the scum that you, the West, have been financing. Oh, you're upset that we've destroyed all your structures, your NGOs, and all those that you've been paying for.
So strong words, strong language there, and to put it all in context, we'll be speaking to our BBC Russian reporter just a little later in the programme, so do stay with us for that. Now, in a sign of how serious Central Europe's COVID surge has become, Austria is to make it a legal requirement to get vaccinated from February. It's also becoming the first European Union country to reimpose a nationwide lockdown. The Austrian Chancellor, Alexander Schallenberg, told a news conference that the lockdown would begin on Monday and last a maximum of 20 days. He said it hurt enormously to have to reimpose restrictions, but that it was necessary because too many people had chosen not to get vaccinated.
Our goal was to vaccinate the unvaccinated rather than lock down the vaccinated. Despite campaigns and discussions in the media, we haven't managed to persuade enough people to get vaccinated. The measures we've introduced over the past few weeks have helped to increase the numbers of the vaccinated, but not by enough. For a long time, it was the political consensus that we didn't want a vaccine mandate, but now we have to look at the reality.
Go to Vienna, our correspondent Bethany Bell. Hi, Bethany. So 2 big measures announced.
Yes, this lockdown now for what the Chancellor said would be a maximum of 20 days, a measure that will be reassessed after 10 days. People will be asked to stay at home except for essential reasons like going to work, going shopping for food or for exercise. And the second measure that was announced was that as of February, Austria says it will impose a mandatory vaccination on people. The Chancellor said this hadn't been an easy step to take. But it was one he said was necessary given that they didn't want to go lurch from one wave of infection to another, although it has to be said that this is a controversial step here in Austria.
Yeah, controversial step, Bethany, and what's the public reaction there?
Well, it's a very mixed reaction. Among the vaccinated, some people are cross that they have to go back down into lockdown. Others are saying it's high time more pressure was put upon the unvaccinated. Some people have expressed concerns about whether this move for mandatory vaccination is indeed constitutional. The head of the far-right vaccine skeptical Freedom Party, Herbert Kickl, who is currently suffering from COVID himself, has said that the government was throwing the constitution overboard. He said Austria was going into the direction of a dictatorship. The Chancellor, Alexander Schallenberg, said it is constitutional to have a vaccine mandate in a pandemic, and he said Austria had had vaccine mandates in the past with diseases like smallpox. But the Freedom Party has called for protest tomorrow. This is a controversial move. Around 2/3 of Austria's population are currently fully vaccinated against COVID. That is one of the lowest figures when it comes to Western Europe and vaccinations.
OK, Bethany Bell there, live for us in Vienna. Thank you very much indeed for that update. Let's move on now to the continuing crisis between Poland and Belarus. I think we can now speak to our BBC Russian reporter, Alina Isachenko. Now, we heard an update there, an outtake from an interview with Steve Rosenberg from President Lukashenko of Belarus. Strong language, strong words. It was a couple of minutes ago now. Could you just start by reminding essentially what his main point was?
Absolutely. What we have heard from Mr. Lukashenko fits within his narrative and what he said a few months ago at the beginning of the migrant crisis between Belarus and the EU. Alexander Lukashenko has said that he is indeed not responsible for bringing these people into the country and that he will no longer stop migrants crossing Belarus border into the EU. And this was response to the sanctions which EU imposed on Belarus earlier this year. However, EU has a very different stance on this. France and a number of other countries have accused Lukashenko and his close allies of bringing migrants into Belarus by organizing so-called tourism trips. So the migrants can go into Belarus and then can be brought by special buses and transportation right to the border with the EU, from where they can take it and cross it themselves. Now, it is also very important to mention that since the beginning of this crisis, Alexander Lukashenko have accused the EU of stirring up the migrant crisis at the border. He has also accused Polish border control of brutal crackdown of migrants. Every day on Belarus state TV, we see the images of migrants suffering without food, without water. And of course, Mr. Lukashenko blames that this is fault of the EU and this is fault of Poland. Now, we are also aware that this week, Alexander Lukashenko has held talks with Angela Merkel. And according to Mr. Lukashenko's press secretary, Natalia Eisman, Belarusian leader has proposed that EU should take 2,000 migrants to EU and to the Germany. Now, Natalia Eisman claims that there are 7,000 migrants currently in Belarus, 2,000 of which are at the border themselves. Now, for the remaining 5,000, Lukashenko has said that they should probably go back to their own countries. To summarize, migrants have ended up in a very tricky situation because Belarus authorities are pushing them in the hands of Polish forces. Polish police are pushing them back into Belarus territory, and we're yet to see how the crisis at the Belarus-Polish border will unfold.
OK, just quickly, just on this style, I suppose, of the interview itself, for people watching around the world who may not have seen Lukashenko being interviewed before, his language, his tone and his style, was that out of the ordinary or fairly normal for him?
It was absolutely normal. In fact, Alexander Lukashenko, known within the country and outside the country as well, for his very direct rhetoric. He is not looking for the right words. He is not looking for the right expression. He is just saying things as it is. And this is exactly what he said today. I didn't invite them here. So it's a very direct language and in a way, very provocative. Interesting enough, even before the interview was released, Belarus state Telegram channels have already accused the West of speaking cliches and have said that Lukashenko can take up any questions and defend his position.
Great stuff. It's so good to have your expertise on this and just putting all that background and context for us. Thank you very much. We'll speak to you a little later on.
Thank you.
Right, let's go to India now. The Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, has announced a surprise repeal of 3 farm laws, which prompted nearly a year of protest from hundreds of thousands of farmers. Mr Modi made the U-turn in a speech to the nation to mark the birthday of the founder of the Sikh religion. Now, farm leaders have welcomed the announcement, as our South Asia correspondent, Rajini Vaidyanathan, reports from Delhi.
Victory for India's farmers in a standoff that lasted close to a year. Relief and celebration. An unexpected win, which tasted especially sweet against a Prime Minister who rarely backs down. Addressing the nation on the birth anniversary of Guru Nanak, the founder of the Sikh faith, Narendra Modi surprised many when he said he'd scrap his controversial farm reforms.
Today, I have come to tell you, the whole country, that we have decided to withdraw and repeal all 3 agricultural laws. In the Parliament session starting later this month, we will complete the constitutional process to repeal these 3 agricultural laws.
Through many seasons, the cold winter, a devastating COVID wave, tens of thousands of farmers camped on the outskirts of the Indian capital. They created a community, a mass protest against laws they felt would drive them out of business. The government said it wanted to modernise India's age-old agriculture sector, allowing farmers to sell directly to big businesses. But farmers were worried they'd lose the minimum price guarantees they get for certain crops, and in the end, everything they'd worked for. Now they're smiling, but they're also sceptical. Many don't trust the government's word and say they won't go home until the laws are formally repealed in Parliament.
We have taken a lot of pain. We are not happy yet because these laws still need to be repealed in Parliament.
It's a small step.
It's a small step towards a long march of victory. We are on the right path.
As they chant for victory, winning in state elections next year is the reason many say the government backed down. With upcoming votes in the North Indian states of Punjab and Uttar Pradesh, the Prime Minister needed to keep farmers on side. But will today's move be enough to win them over? Rajini Vaidyanathan, BBC News, Delhi.
Well, let's speak now to Shaina Nana Chodasama, a spokesperson for Mr Modi's BJP party. Thank you very much for coming on the programme.
Thank you. Thank you.
So this is a huge U-turn after a year. What took you so long?
So I think this is a very magnanimous Prime Minister, a Prime Minister who is a statesman. And as Mr Modi said in his speech today, he said that, you know, he conceded and said we have been unable to convince farmers, and whatever I did was for the farmers, and what I am doing is for the country. Do understand you have had archaic situations where government after government, they have only given freebies, subsidies and subs to our farming community. And 60% of India is part of this agricultural community. So the Prime Minister's attempt has only been to make sure that the three laws were understood. But obviously there was a fear psychosis by certain segments of society that continued to agitate. And I think this is the first Prime Minister that India has ever seen who has not had an arrogant approach and has said that he will go back to Parliament and repeal these laws. And for all those who've been just constantly questioning, this is not about victory or defeat. This is about repealing archaic laws.
Okay.
And that was what it's so.
You've
as
said,
I said,
I appreciate that. You have said that. What about the argument from your opponents that actually this is more to do with elections coming up and this was just too unpopular?
It has nothing to do with elections. Do understand that even when you need to repeal laws, you need to go back to Parliament. You need to ensure that every segment that you have talked about is also considered. And I think that the major factors that we have to take in is that today, when we as a government are saying that you can sell even privately, but you must also sell to corporates, corporatize the entire situation so that you're not just debt-ridden season after season, you're not relying only on climatic changes, using technology. All of this will take a long time to communicate, but our Honourable Prime Minister has clearly said that
there are lots of farmers that do appreciate those changes and still didn't want them. They were out protesting for a year. People died during these protests. Is there any apology to those people?
Well, if we weren't a sensitive government, I don't think we would have repealed these three farm laws, which are very progressive in nature. But the Honourable Prime Minister, as he said, this is not about us versus them or victory versus defeat. This is about our country. And if it is about our country, he, as a democratically elected Prime Minister, is only doing what a lot of people are echoing on ground.
So he could stand up and apologise. He could stand up and apologise for not listening for the last year.
I'm sure that's exactly what you as the international media want. I don't think he owes an apology to anybody because he is the most popular Prime Minister we've ever had, and he always echoes the sentiment of the people of India. And please do understand that when we talk about the farmers' struggle, he, as a man from the ground, does realize what it took to reach where they have today as a community and what it is. When we talked about MSP being bigger than the farm laws, I don't think that that is about just the Indian farmer. It is a genuine concern for the central government to fulfill the promise of doubling the farmer's income and accepting Swaminathan report, which was tabled years ago. And that is why the Prime Minister has always led from the front, but his humility and his statesmanship-like qualities need to be absolutely acknowledged today.
You have said that. You've certainly got that across. Shaina Nana Chudasama, thank you so much for coming on the programme. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And it is a big U-turn and a big story with lots of ramifications. We'll have plenty more on it in around 20 minutes' time. Right, do stay with us here on BBC World News. Still to come. The Women's Tennis Association says it's considering pulling tournaments out of China as fears grow over the missing tennis star Peng Shuai.
Nature teaches us everything when everything is in balance. Progress for humanity relies on a deep sense of care for our planet. Together, we can make the ones born today the first generation to benefit from a carbon-neutral world. We call it Generation One.
At Hyundai, we are helping to create a more sustainable world for Generation One.
Scotland's always been inventive, always aiming high, supporting leaps in science, helping ideas fly.
We're learning for the future, acting now for what's ahead.
We're standing up for what's right and saying what must be said. Keith Mila Falcha. These are words that we hold dear. We are Scotland, and good things live here. If you share these feelings too, Scotland's waiting and open to you.
Welcome back. This is BBC World News. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. The headlines. Belarus's authoritarian leader, Alexander Lukashenko, has spoken exclusively to the BBC. He admits that his forces may have helped migrants cross into the European Union. As coronavirus infections surge across Europe, Austria is making COVID vaccinations compulsory and is reintroducing a full national lockdown. To the US, Kamala Harris has become the first woman in American history to become acting president of the United States. She took over for 1 hour and 25 minutes as head of state and commander-in-chief, while President Biden had a medical procedure under anaesthetic. The president's press secretary, Jen Psaki, said Ms. Harris was in the White House during Mr. Biden's colonoscopy, which was carried out as part of an annual physical checkup. Mr. Biden has now resumed his presidential duties. Well, let's go to Washington, speak to our senior North America reporter, Anthony Zerka. So, a little bit of history today.
Yeah, a little bit of history. Obviously, last November, Kamala Harris became the first woman vice president in U.S. history. So it seemed maybe it was only a matter of time before she became the first acting U.S. president. Joe Biden isn't the first president to have handed off powers like this. George W. Bush did it in the early 2000s. Ronald Reagan did it. George H.W. Bush did it. So with Biden undergoing a routine physical and the fact that colonoscopies are routine for someone of Biden's age, it was not surprising then that he invoked the 25th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which governs incapacitated presidents to temporarily hand over presidential powers to Kamala Harris.
So it's very temporary. Things are back now as they were. I remember during the election campaign, talk of Joe Biden and then potentially Kamala Harris running as a presidential candidate next time. And that would seem now the logical next step, as you mentioned, the achievement she's already made. Is there still talk of that kind of thing?
There's always speculation about the political aspirations of a vice president, particularly someone like Kamala Harris, who has run for president before. She ran, of course, in 2020 before becoming Joe Biden's vice presidential nominee. Throw in the fact that Joe Biden is the oldest president in American history. He turns 79 tomorrow. That has kind of goosed speculation that he might not run for re-election in 2024. Although I will note that Biden and the administration say that he's definitely running for re-election. But it's natural for this sort of thing to, this sort of speculation to come up. And Kamala Harris, as a vice president, the sitting vice president, certainly would have the pole position if that spot opens up among the Democrats.
Interesting stuff. Thanks for that, Anthony.
My pleasure.
Now, the outcry over the whereabouts of the Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai continues to escalate, with the Women's Tennis Association saying it's prepared to withdraw from tournaments in China unless it gets proof that she's safe. The UN also said that it wants proof of Ms. Peng's well-being and called for a full investigation. We'll have more in a moment about why it would be such a huge step for the WTA to pull out of China. Let's look first, though, at the pressure on Beijing. Here's our Asia-Pacific editor, Celia Hatton.
We have the UN Human Rights Commission basically echoing what the Women's Tennis Association has called for. They want evidence that Peng Shuai is safe, but they also want the allegations she made against one of the very people at the very top of the Chinese government to be investigated thoroughly. And those are two different things, really. Perhaps the Chinese government might be able to produce Peng Shuai. Perhaps we might be able to hear from her. But they're also calling for those allegations to be investigated. And I just can't see that happening. And so I think Beijing is in a very difficult position.
So that was Celia there. Now, how big a move would it be if the WTA were to pull out of China? Here's New York Times tennis correspondent Christopher Clary.
They basically have put a lot of their cards on China for the last decade. It's been an increasing investment on their part and putting more and more tournaments in that part of the world. It made a lot of sense. It was a situation where the sport was losing some traction, the women's game in particular commercially in the United States and some of its bigger markets traditionally. And the feeling was that Asia was the growth market, as it's been for many leagues, and so they put a lot of their bets on that region. To be able to pull out entirely from the Chinese market would be a huge blow to the bottom line in the short term. There's no question. They have about a third of their prize money totals in a normal year without the pandemic would be based in China, and Reportedly, a third of their overall revenues as a tour are there. It's a huge hit to take. I think it's an easier prospect to think about just because of the situation with the pandemic. They haven't had a tournament in China all year because of restrictions. Only one last year with about 10 tournaments scheduled. So they've already seen, I think, what a post-China world looks like in tennis. I think they have a much better idea of how to manage it economically, but it would still be a huge hit and a big blow to the future of the sport in terms of the Asian presence.
Thanks to Christopher Clary there. Now, deforestation in the Amazon rainforest has reached its highest levels in over 15 years. A report by Brazil's Space Research Agency shows 13,000 square kilometres of rainforest were cut down between 2020 and 2021. That's almost 17 times the size of New York City. Right, before I go, some pictures now of the longest partial lunar eclipse for centuries. It could be seen from Japan, Chile and the US. NASA says the partial eclipse, lasting 3 hours, 28 minutes and 23 seconds, was the longest since 1440. Up to 99% of the moon's face was within the Earth's shadow. And we have a while to wait for the next one. That'll be in 2669. That's it. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. This is BBC News.